involvement with the chapter on institutions has been a very interesting, if at times rather complex, piece of work to do. The group of people surrounding the chapter came from a wide range of different backgrounds and interests, including child protection experts, disability experts, and people who work generally on the issue of deinstitutionalization. And we struggled a little bit at the beginning with finding the right definitions for things. So when we use the word institutions, what do we mean? Are we including all forms of institutions? Do we mean by this an institution that always deprives persons of their liberty, or are there institutions that don't necessarily deprive children of their liberty? So this was one of the early issues that we came up against and that we had to work with. Deprivation of liberty too is quite a complex idea, because it begins with the idea of restrictions on freedom of movement. And obviously anybody who's placed by a court order in any form of institution does have their freedom of movement curtailed. But at what point does that become deprivation of liberty? And so during the course of writing the chapter and through many iterations and discussions and heated debate at times, we've come to realize that it is, in a sense, a continuum, and that we start with smallish restrictions on freedom of movement of the individual, ending up with a serious confinement of deprivation of liberty. And somewhere along that continuum, we can see that deprivation of liberty has occurred. Now, the other thing that has been challenging, but again very interesting, was the fact that the children's rights sector and the disability sector had a slightly different approach in the issue of whether or not any form of care outside of a family is acceptable. The Convention on the Rights of the Child seems to recognize that this is one possible alternative, whilst preferring family care, that children should grow up in a family and that they are supposed to be supported by their parents, and the state has an obligation to support their parents, to look after them. But the Convention also appears as a last resort to view that there may be situations where placement in a facility outside of a family setting is a possibility, but only where it's in the best interests of the child. And it should not involve deprivation of liberty, although it might involve some restrictions on freedom of movement. The disability sector, and indeed the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, has a slightly different approach in that it views family care as extremely important, and also states that all efforts must be made to keep children in their own families, firstly, with the proper support from the state, to try to find alternatives within family placements wherever possible. And it doesn't expressly say anything about the possibility of a placement outside of the family. And General Comment number 5 of the CRPD has strengthened that further and made it quite clear that in the view of the committee, any placement outside the family is unacceptable when it comes to children with disabilities. And so we've had to walk a pathway of trying to understand, what are these distinctions about? Is it in fact a development of human rights law that is applicable to all children? Does it mean that children with disabilities might need or are entitled to an extra protection? And so it's been an interesting conversation that we've been having, and I think we're getting close now to the finalization of the chapter, and I'm confident that we will be able to come to a conclusion that will, for the time being, at least find the common ground between these approaches. No doubt the conversation will continue, and if there's one thing that the global study has done, it is that it's brought into sharp relief some of these really important conversations that have to happen.